Hello and welcome to Hoppy Valley, the Burton History Podcast, with me, Blue Yates, and on the other side of the River Trent, my colleague Jim. Hello, Jim.
Hello.
Right, what are we going to talk about today, Jim?
Norkies.
We're going to talk about the Norkies. Yeah. Um, what do you kind of think about when you hear the term Norkies in relation to Burton history?
Teapots.
There are teapots involved, but the teapots originate in Swad, don't they?
Yeah, that's the first thing that comes into my mind though when you say the word Norkie. I think of a Norkie teapot.
Yeah.
Um, but I should probably contextualize that. Um, so Norkies are a very important part of Burton's social and economic history in that we needed a migrant workforce who would come to town to perform a seasonal shift of work.
Yeah.
And these men were largely sourced from Norfolk and the surrounding locales, and
And
therefore were given the name Norkies by the Burtonians once they arrived.
yeah, there were a lot of people from Suffolk as well. They were generally called Norkies or Suffolk punches after the horse. But yeah, they were men who were, I think, the lowest the lower qualifying age was 17, and they were generally looking for physically fit, unmarried men. Um, I've got some. I've done a bit of research on this.
Why un
Largely, pardon,
why unmarried?
because they had to travel on their own and get
Okay.
lodgings to work. They couldn't bring a wife with them, and they were also away, as I'll come to shortly. They left on the second Monday in September, and they weren't back till Whit Week in
Oh,
May. So it was a 9 month working uh, pattern. We'll come to that in a minute. I just wanted to talk about
sorry.
about the. I don't know if for those of us who, or those of you who are not watching on YouTube, me holding this book up uh, in backwards as it is.
Oh, it's
Probably
only
what.
backwards to you. We can see it forwards.
Good. Where beards wag all. The relevance of the oral tradition is a book by the historian George Ewart Evans, who is extremely important in this regard because before he wrote this book and did his research, the date of publication of this book was 1970. Um, a lot of that research obviously would be happening before the publication date. No one had ever really looked at some of these kinds of stories, not just the story of Burton movement of labour, but also all over the country. A lot of stuff which happened primarily before the First World War. It's really a kind of a story of labour patterns that occurred between the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the beginning of the First World War in what is a 99 year century period. We find that this particular pattern of labour starts to occur in around the 1860s. And it's one of those things we've talked quite a few times before, Jim, about the industrial changes that were happening in the brewing industry around this time that enabled this kind of peak output to occur in the 1890s. There was a couple of things that happened. You mentioned the invention of a certain type of beer cap, which was important in terms of putting beer into bottles for its longevity and for its transportation. We've got the invention of refrigeration, which is a really key point. Um, and we've got an innovation here that brings mass scale work into maltings. over the winter, and it's particularly even though uh, all year all year brewing can start to happen after about the 1880s. Um, they're still looking for a lot of people to come in to Burton to do the maltings, primarily over the winter and the autumn, winter, and spring period. And the reason for that is that the Burton people, they don't want to do it. It's an absolutely horrible job, and they don't want to do it. So, why do you think people from East Anglia are happy to come to Burton over the winter?
Because they're out of work.
Yeah, the agricultural um, work patterns in East Anglia, obviously, that you're not going to get any or very little work over the winter. You might get some working as a fisherman, but that's quite limited. You might get one looking after horses because they need to be stabled and cared for over the winter as well. Um, but you're not going to get anything like the amount of work that there is in the summer. Another reason for it is the Burton brewers like Bass, and Bass is actually the brewer that's kind of documented in the book. A number of seasons, we've got lists of people who came over. It's three times the wages. So three times the wages is a pretty big enticement.
Yeah.
You've got to work from September to May. When you come back home, there's loads of work on, but you can really choose whether you want to do that or not because you've basically just been paid, nearly three times as much as you would have got had you been working in agriculture for the whole year.
Yeah. I mean, September to May. So you're home May to September. Um, so 3, maybe 4 months
Yeah.
in total, 5 at the very most, depending on what dates. But those those months at home are the minority.
Mm.
You're mainly staying and working. So I suppose it really needs to be a good enticement, doesn't it?
Yeah, and of course, not everybody went every year by any means. Some men would have gone once, then they met a local woman and decided to stay, or they decided to stay in Burton anyway and just do it as a job, um, as a regular job. There were a few old hands, as it were, but the majority of the men were sort of fresh on that season. 500 per year, and that's just working on Bass's mold things. So, although Bass is the biggest brewer in the town, there are
There are some
probably
others that are not very far behind, though, aren't there?
there's probably hundreds of men who are coming to malt for Allsops and for the Burton Brewery Company and for others that we have absolutely no record of. And those men could come from anywhere in
I
the
mean
UK.
that's gonna present. I mean, from a to look at this from a social history point of view, that's going to present certain problems to the town itself. You've got a very large influx of migrant workers
Mm,
who are largely male with no responsibilities and no, uh, they haven't got home. So, A, they're going to need lodgings. That's a
yeah,
lot of places to lodge people.
yeah.
B, they're not, going home to a wife or family every night. So they're going to be out drinking, aren't they?
They're going to be drinking at work and out drinking. We'll come to that in
Yeah.
a second. But yeah, you're right about where the lodgings were. A lot of these men, in their testimonies in the book, say that they stayed in Station Street. And he said that a lot of the landladies were Irish women who kept lodging houses. I don't know whether or not the Station Street part relates specifically to people who work for Bass, because as we can see now, the old Bass Brewery is actually pretty much on
Yeah.
centered around Station Street more than any other brewery is. Sorry, at the top you got all what would have been all stops at the top as well. So there's a lot of lodgings around there. Station Street was had a nickname that they called it Blood and Guts Alley, and the chap says you'd be if you weren't careful you could get a brick in your head down Station Street. This is before the First World War, by the way. When you arrived on the chartered train, they told you there'd be no Sundays after Leicester Corner because you had to work Sundays. You didn't get a day off. Although it was also dependent on what the requirements of the job were, because sometimes more maltings would need to be done over a longer hour day. Other times, shorter maltings or maybe no maltings needed to be done at all. So sometimes you would get days off, but you didn't know when. When you arrived, you'd be given what was called a fresh up pint. So you go into any pub, say you were fresh up, and you would get given a free pint. So you could probably start to notch up the free pints a bit after a while.
I'm assuming
Um,
that doesn't work.
there's no sort of you're not stamped on a card or anything to prove you've had it, so you could just keep saying that you'd only just arrived. One of the first jobs you got was called the storeroom trot, which was 100 yards carrying a 16 stone bag of malt up and down the 5 flights of industrial steps that you get in a malting's house. And they'd say, "Well, this was the first half an hour." They'd say, "Oh, this is easy enough." They said, but after 14 hours of it, it wasn't so easy. And the men used to wear red neckerchiefs so they could hide the bleeding shoulders that they'd got from carrying the sacks of malt. And they took these malt they carried them into the garner. The garner was the name of any kind of like malt store. And we can see some of these malting houses are still in existence. So if you go up Wetmer Road, for example, there's some great examples there. You can see a few of them off Orninglow Street as well. I think the best ones are the Wetmer Road ones, and I
Yeah.
think that they are in fact the very same ones that the Bass workers were talking about having worked in. And it was a very dangerous business. Um, this malt came in from the USA, India, Benghazi, and South Africa and other places. The South African malt had loads of sand in it, apparently, which didn't help on the shoulders.
No.
And it also took a lot more work in terms of making sure it was all sort of ready to go onto the maltings floor. If you didn't fancy this much, there were police on the gates to stop you leaving once you'd signed the contract as well. I suppose you could leave, you could run away, and they wouldn't come and get you. You know what, like sort of leaving the army or going AWOL from the army or something. But I don't think it was easy, and you'd never be taken on again. And in some cases, I mean, your family in East Anglia would be absolutely relying on this work. Because not everybody, of course, was single, and not everybody was telling the truth. So it's a pretty it's an interesting situation, isn't it? Should we have a look at an example of the working conditions?
Yeah, please.
When you're making a dark beer, a stout or a
Oh,
porter,
yeah.
um, the maltings floor that burns the malt, cooks the malt, has to get up to 218 degrees Fahrenheit, which is over 100 degrees centigrade,
That's very hot, Blue.
isn't it?
That's
Um,
it's hotter than we can tolerate as a human.
yeah, it's above the boiling point of water. So if you're in that kind of heat, you are going to start to literally boil.
Yeah, you're gonna cook.
You're going to cook. So I mean, you can't go onto the floor at that temperature. But what they can do is, having brought the floor to that temperature with the kilns underneath, is open the slats at the top, let the winter air in, bring it down to a more, reasonable sort of 70 degrees centigrade. And then you go in and you turn the malt over. And that's very, 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 very hot. You need special boots for that so you don't burn your feet. You'll be bleeding out of your ears and eyes, at least the first time you do it. So it's a pretty grim working situation, not just with the heat, but just the length of the shifts, the weight of the work, very heavy work. Some men, many men, would be given 16 pints during a shift. A lot of,
During.
yeah, that's during the shift. A lot of men are going to be drinking 16 pints. That's before they go out drinking after work.
Do we know if this is small beer or
Some
or
of it's, yeah, some of it's a weaker beer. Some of it's not as we would kind of think of. It's not like a sort of pint of Bass or something. But it's not. I mean, it's not far off. It is a weaker beer. It's got a particular name. I saw this a minute ago before we went on air, if we can call it that. But I can't find. Typically enough, I can't find it now. Oh yeah, it's called Laxey. It was called Laxey. This was the beer you had while you were doing the screening. It was a mild beer. If you got the best beer, you'd only want a pint. You wouldn't work. It'd be too strong for you to drink with the heat. But you could have as much Laxey as you liked. A man who was working with me, so I'm quoting this chap here, a man who was working with me drank 21 pints of beer before breakfast. That was the time when we got up at 2 in the morning. You had to get up at all times of the night when the foreman said the piece of barley was ready to start. 21 pints before he had his breakfast. That's a good day's drink, ain't it? He was a big, strong fellow. He came from Debenham. So we had 21
well,
pints before breakfast. How many pints he had?
subsequently we don't know.
Is
Well,
anybody's guess, but I think it would probably be quite a few. Um,
so I'm guessing Laxey would be somewhere around the 3% mark.
yeah, I'd have thought it'd be something like that. Yeah, as I said, a mild beer. But I mean, if you have 20 pints of a 3% beer, it's
Well, do you know what? If nothing else, I'd be going for a wee a lot.
and I suppose one of these points of this is that they're so dehydrated that they're not actually having to go to the loo
Yeah,
afterwards because they're losing so much so much
yeah,
hydration through sweat in that temperature. So that's pretty
yeah.
phenomenal, isn't it? Things that they did whilst they were there, they went to. Well, we'll come to yours in a minute. They had a group photo, and in our handbook we give out for people who come on our celebrated history tour. Next one, the 28th of December, I think. I always say I can never remember. There they are. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see a group photo of some of the maltsters, and I think that's outside. Certainly, I think the top photograph is outside one of the Wetmore Road maltings houses. I mean, gets a lot of maltings houses look fairly similar, but that one does look very much like the one you see, or one of the ones you see when you walk up Wetmore Road. So they had a great photograph, and I mean, one of the sad things about doing the research into the Norkies is that much of this happened before the First World War, and a lot of the men that you see photographed would have fallen in the First World War, so never made it back to the Maltings after 1918, and one of
Did
the lost generations of men from the war.
now this might be something that I've imagined or half remembered somewhere in my head. But was there a Pals battalion of Norkies?
who actually signed up from
Yeah.
a Burton location.
Yeah, I've got something in my head that there was a Pals battalion of Norkies who had signed up from Burton in the Great War.
It's possible, isn't it? I
Yeah.
don't know of it, but it'd be interesting to know if anyone knows anything about that. Get in touch with us. We can have a look into that definitely, and get back to you in due course about whether or not that was the case. We certainly know that the Argyle Arms in Uxbridge Street, that was a recruitment place for the Argyle and Sutherland Highlanders Regiment in the First World War, um, which is a regiment obviously that's geographically not located particularly anywhere nearby. So there might have been some other types of recruitment that went on. And men from Norfolk, Suffolk, quite possibly recruited in Burton. So yeah, we'll look into that. It's quite an interesting idea. Um, you get your swaddling teapot, and you'd get yourself, which you could have any message on for the folks back home, and you'd
And
buy yourself
now
in.
these teapots are no ordinary teapot, are they, Lou? Have you seen a Norkie teapot?
I've seen pictures of a Norkie teapot.
They're um they're larger than your average teapot and quite elaborately decorated.
But I noticed that they were very, very decorative. Yes.
Um, so I mean, from what I know of Norkie teapots, they were definitely seen as a present for either your wife or your mother back home.
Yeah,
Uh,
with the
and
message accordingly, but very much of a sort of keepsake of your time here. In the interview that we'll find, you're going to put the link to the University of
yeah,
East Anglia film. Have you seen that yet?
I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. Well, I say that I have watched it years ago. Um, I believe, but I know I haven't. I've got to watch it again. But the link for that video Blue's referencing is in the show notes for today's episode.
Yeah, and I'd urge anybody who's interested in this to watch that because it's an absolutely brilliant film that really interviews these two chaps who came here in, I think it's about the 1912 season, and they're referred to in the book that I showed you earlier, the George Ewart Evans book, and it's really a film of this last chapter of the book, really. It talks a lot, it's got a lot of their testimony about it. One of the chaps in it goes when he went to Swad to get his teapot. The fair was on, and like in a lot of stories that this particular gentleman tells, he ended up having a fight with someone. They stood out obviously because of their accents, and their accents are very pronounced on this film, to the extent it's actually quite difficult to understand what some of them are saying. Um, so you get that, you get your teapot, and also you buy yourself a new suit. You get yourself a nice new suit from one of the Burton tailors, um, and that would kind of define you as well, um, to some extent of who you are, where you were from, and what you did. Um, so there's lots and lots of anecdotal stuff in the film, and I'd sort of urge to say leave that to people to go and watch it. Um, I think that there's a great quote in it from one of the gentlemen, James Knights, that I'll sort of end this section on. Certainly, it was up in the 1912 season, and he says, "I fought in the mud on the Western Front, but when I got to Burton, that was the worst place I ever did see for hard work." So, coming up to the Maltings was something that was an experience that stayed with these men forever. Sometimes it was more brutal, I think, than some of the experiences they'd had in wartime. But certainly, as an employment experience, it was something that they'd never forget.
So, do we have? I mean, this is. I mean, this is a massive amount of people coming into Burton, working in Burton, providing a service to Burton. Do we have a migrant population that's settled in Burton Blue? Is there a common theme of the of migrant population settlement? Like, have we got? Is there a Norfolk community, a Norkie community in Burton, or was there a Norkie community in Burton?
Well, in terms of a community, there were definitely not in the sense of like a bunch of Norfolk people who kind of hung around in pubs singing Norfolk songs all the time. I mean, they would have had when they came up, have all to some extent tended to have drunk together after work because they're all on the same shifts as well. Did people settle in Burton? The answer is yes. Undoubtedly, they did. I know for a fact that William Youngman, who's listed here in the which year was this? This was in the 1890 to 91 malting season. Many of you will know this family, the Youngman family. Um, this is the great grandfather of my friend, Zach Youngman. And the Youngman family, they did settle, and they came from Saxlingham, the nearest railway station to which was Norwich. Many other names in this list, and I'm not going to list them, read them out because it would take ages. But they're names of people that people that you around here that you do know. And I don't, not just kind of very common names or anything like Smith or so on, but there are some names here that probably, that do represent families that settled. So yes, many men did, and then probably continued to work in not necessarily in the maltings as such, but would then after a couple of seasons of that or a season of that be promoted into a permanent role working in the breweries, and then be able to get a promotion and a full time job that wasn't quite so dangerous and it wasn't quite so physically taxing. I mean, the reason why they're looking for 17-year-olds is because this job is something which you're not going to be able to do it
Yeah,
if you're probably over 30 or over 35. It's so physically demanding, relentless
you need
that
men in their prime.
you need people who are young men to do it, yeah, and you need men who are also of a certain build. So
So not
it's
not my stature then.
well, I mean, you'd probably be all right after a few weeks on it, but I mean, certainly not our age though either. I mean, especially not my age, but it really is a physically hard job for a young person, a young man to do. Um, and that's why they're looking for these particular types. And they were pretty young when they went there. So when this guy was writing his research in his book in the 1960s, some of these men were still alive. Some of the men who'd been 17 before the First World War, so let's say born in the 1890s, would be men in their 70s, late 70s, who could still be interviewed and could still remember what happened. And that's a really crucial point, because had George Ewart Evans not done this research by the mid 80s, these all these men probably would have passed away. Nobody would be left to actually tell the story. And
Yeah, sad.
whilst the story exists in terms of Bass's records, that these men were hired and they were brought in, and this is what they did, and this is what they were paid to do. Those records exist, but those human stories wouldn't. The anecdotes, the experiences that they had, that really kind of, for us, I think, particularly as local historians, that really light up the narrative, because they're talking about places that still exist, pubs that still exist, places that we know and may walk past, every day or so. For example, they used to there was a tradition of what was called step dancing, which is kind of like a tap dance type of thing, folk tap dancing that happened in Norfolk and Suffolk and didn't particularly happen in Burton. But they brought it to Burton and they used to do it. They used to step dance on a barrel. And one of the pubs that they used to do that used to be famous for this was at the Star and Garter. Now we'd remember the Star and Garter behind the town hall,
Yeah.
which is flats now. It's no longer with us as a pub, sadly. It wasn't that long ago that it was converted. Um, and pubs that there were a lot of pubs that they would have drunk in, and all the pubs that exist now, so unless they're modern inventions, would have been there then.
Yeah.
So like the
Not what I
Devonshire,
would
the
say.
Coopers, the Roebuck, and
There are very few pubs in town that are new inventions. I mean, the micro pubs themselves, they wouldn't have been there, obviously. And
yeah,
I think the only other premises that I think of that are modern pubs would be Weatherspoons and the Prince of Brewers. The others
there was
would
a
have.
pub on the site of the Prince of Brewers, though, wasn't there? That was the Star, I think, or
And
became the Galaxy.
obviously the hangar, as it is now, the old blue posts, that would have been a different incarnation of the pub before they knocked down the railway.
Yeah, it would have been a pub on the site as well,
Yeah.
though. I mean, the thing is, I mean, if you've got, let's say, Innuendo, I mean, that's a new building. Um, that's not wasn't traditionally a pub, but there might have been a pub on that site before
Yeah.
that corner building was knocked down, where the library used to be. And we had like Gurkha used to be the Staffordshire Knot pub, didn't it? Or sort
Yeah.
of very, very close to it. Um, so yeah, I mean, these locations of pubs. I mean, there were just so many more of them then. I mean,
Yeah.
how many was the when we did that calculation for Mr. Thorne's poem in the 1840s? I think it was. How many pubs were there from the top of High Street down to the
38.
Litchfield streets? 38 pubs. I mean,
And they're just the ones he mentions. There might have been others.
yeah, the ones that rhymed, and the 17 breweries as well.
Yeah.
So
This
what
is-
else was this? There's 17 breweries and 38 pubs. What else you got any space for? I mean, a couple of hotels that are pubs as well. I mean, that's it, isn't it? There's
What
no
have you got
space
space
for
for?
anything
The odd punch up.
else. Like a permanent punch up. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's very little space for much else really. I mean, you factor in level crossings and train tracks, railway tracks. You've got 17 breweries, 38 pubs, and you've only got about 400 yards. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Much
not
is it?
no, possibly not even that far. So yeah, wherever they were going, where they were drinking, were places that we know. And when they talk about the places that you know, there's kind of I think there's a real resonance in that narrative for me anyway. I find
Yeah.
that quite fascinating that we can sort of we're touching. It's almost like touching distance over a
It
century.
is, isn't it? And I think, I mean, for me, certainly, I mean, not so much in Burton, um, but when I've visited older sites, like recently this year, I went to Winchester, and when you're in the cathedral and you think to yourself, people who lived, hundreds, you know, indeed, maybe even 1,000 years ago, have touched this stone that I'm now touching.
Yeah,
This is remarkable.
that's
Um,
the shrine of Saint Swithin is there, isn't it, in
yeah,
Winchester? Um,
I think so. Alfred could have walked here.
and so isn't it Queen Emma, the tomb of Queen Emma,
Yeah,
who was the wife of King Canute
yeah,
and Harold?
yeah,
So yeah, 1,000 years ago, best part of. Pretty amazing. Um, for those of you who don't want to go to Winchester, although I would recommend it because it's a fantastic city to visit, we can do that at Lichfield. And to some extent, you can do it at the Long Hop. in Burton. Um, our abbey, though, largely is not available for public access, although we're working on that um, as as we go forward,
Yeah.
constant, ever in our mind. Um, so yeah, that touching distance to it, like 100 years ago, I think it just shows you what if a century can be kind of that close. That what if these people from 100 years ago felt the same about 100 years before that? So you're almost touching across time, aren't you? And it's an absolutely brilliant experience, I think. Particularly the Norkies really bring this to life because there's so much of what they talk about that is still it's still with us. It's still physically there. One of the aspects of Burton history that's actually, although Burton would have been absolutely full of Maltings houses and architectural stuff that was designed for brewing purposes, the Maltings were
Yeah.
one of the most distinctive of that architecture.
We don't do we have maltings in Burton still?
The Maltings houses we've got up at Wetmore Road
No, but active malting.
are active
Is
Malting.
malt still made in Burton? I mean, this is one of the things that I always think is a remarkable thing. A lot of the associated industry with brewing happened in Burton because it was convenient to do it all in the same place.
Yeah,
You look at aside from the actual farming of the hops and the barley, um, the malting, the brewing, and even then the use of the waste products like producing Marmite. This is all happening in Burton because of its convenience location wise. And now, today, in modern Burton, I don't think we actually have any malt producers in Burton anymore.
no,
So,
I don't think they do. And I think actually the main maltings industry is actually if it's not imported now. I mean, it moved to East Anglia. So actually, the people who were trained to malt in Burton probably then went to set up their own maltings. Depending on whether because if the barley is actually coming from East Anglia in the first place, and from the kind of agricultural, um, sort of breadbasket of the country, it makes some sense to malt it there and then bring the malt to Burton latterly. Um, I'm talking about something here I don't really know that much about, but I do remember I have remembered seeing maltings in East Anglia, and there's maltings at Alderborough that were converted into the theatre, the concert hall there um, nearby. So it was obviously it was an East Anglian industry as well, um, and maybe that's another thing that we can look at how Burton has actually influenced East Anglian employment by training people in malting, and then they started to set up doing it in their own on their own locations instead of coming to Burton to do it. And I bet that those maltings industries were established around the same time or after 1860, which would sort of
yeah,
lend credibility to that idea. But yeah, it's a fascinating area of Burton's history. A lot of the Burton people will owe their origins to East Anglian migrant workers from this period of time. And it's a sort of 60-year period. It goes on up until it sort of trickles out a little bit, but it goes on until about 1930. The numbers by 1930 are a lot smaller, but that's 60 years, 70 years, isn't it? 70 years of people. Let's say they averaged 500 a year across all the breweries. Yeah, so quite a lot of people, considering the size of Burton at the time. If you're introducing in its heyday, let's say 1,000 people into a town of about 30, 40,000 people, it's quite a big percentage increase
it is, isn't
of,
it? And
of
it's
people.
And oh well, yeah, it's going to be an increase. It's going to be a burden on the infrastructure burden, be a burden on um, the supply chains burden. It's going to be a burden on all those different aspects of Burton life. It's going to have that knock-on effect, isn't it?
It's going to be a burden on the amount of beer there is because not that they're making it, but they're drinking a hell of a lot of it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's obviously they're bringing a benefit. In terms of the housing, that's quite interesting. I think there was some research that's been done into common lodging house stuff down in Fleet Street in the Soho area of Burton, which I think would be fascinating to look into some of that. Maybe have a little bit of a chat about that another time in a different show. There was
Yeah.
a lady who's done some research on that, who'd be great to talk to and possibly interview. But so we were discussing looking at interviewing other people on the show, weren't we, as well?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the Norkies. Anything else you'd like to sort of think to talk about that you've been thinking about, or that comes up in your mind before we finish?
I mean, I think just keep the biggest thing is to what we do is keep the conversation going, keep it talking, and keep the history alive through sharing what we know, sharing what we find, and encouraging people to do the same with us. To if you've got those stories, like you said, the importance of the When Beards Wag All work is that history is recorded. Oral history is such an important part of our society, and it's so often lost. If you've got an elderly relative, you know, take time to make a note of things they tell you, get them to write things down or record them. Grab. Everyone carries a mobile phone with a recording device. And record them telling you a story, because if we don't record those, we don't take those opportunities, like Mr. Hewitt there, who did his research, those stories would be lost, wouldn't they, Blue?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great idea. Maybe we can kind of start an initiative for people to actually record their, you know, senior members of their family telling us stories about what Burton was like when they were growing up and sending them in and making a document out of that. That would be an absolutely brilliant project. Um, and in terms of this particular episode, if a member of your family came from Norfolk and Suffolk to work in the Maltings, and that's why your surname is here in Burton, why you're from Burton, drop us a message to tell us about that history, because we'd be absolutely fascinated to find out how many people there are in Burton now who can trace their relatives, and particularly like their, well, not necessarily their family name, but trace their relatives back to East Anglia. Um, and as I say, there's a few people that I know who can. So that'd be absolutely brilliant. I think that by the time we get about eight generations on, 7 generations on from some of these dates in the 19th century, it's probably likely that the majority of people would have some relative who was from East Anglia, who came here for this reason. So yeah, be great to hear from you in terms of that narrative and that story. It's been I think really one of the most interesting sort of touchstones for Burton history to talk about, because there are so many stories that that happened. So there's so much of a experience over a period of time. So yeah, get in touch with us and let us know if you have anything to tell us about that. But apart from that, just like to hope you've enjoyed this show. Thank you very much for joining us today on Burton History Tours. Sorry, Burton History Podcast. I mentioned Burton History Tours there by accident. Better tell you about the 28th of December, which is our next
I'm
history
looking
walk.
forward to it.
Yeah, we start as usual from the outside the Burton Bridge Inn at midday. I think that's a Sunday, isn't it?
It is. We're doing a Sunday for well, it's a Blur's Day, but it will be a Sunday, yeah.
Yeah, it's a Sunday so that people who have nothing else to do between Christmas and New Year, as Jim eloquently points it out, as Blur's Day, come and join us, and we'd be very happy to see you. You can just turn up with cash. You can book it online. You get a free. Well, it's not free, is it? Because it's £15. But you also get a very very stylish and interesting original booklet to take with you. That is a guide to the tour. We nearly took 3 hours on the one on last Saturday. So yeah, you get.
Well, we had a very convivial bunch, didn't we? They were great company.
We did. They were lovely, and 3 hours entertainment for 15 quid. You can't really. I mean, that's great value. You can't beat it. We can't go to the football for that, can you?
No, and it won't be as entertaining.
Or as long.
No.
So there are a multitude of reasons why it's a better value. But do join us for that. And until then, thanks for listening. Goodbye from me, Blue, and it's goodbye from him.
Jim.
Goodbye.
Bye.